Lathes. Today, there are many industries that use lathes. In fact, you probably used a product that was produced using a lathe to get here, your car. The aerospace and automotive industries use lathes to make their parts. Since lathes are used in many of the manufacturing processes, I decided to research the history of the early lathes. Today, I will give you some history of the lathe and explain the basic operation of a modern lathe. Let's begin with the history of the lathe. The lathe is believed to have been used as early as 1300 BC in ancient Egypt. The earliest record of a lathe is in an Egyptian tomb. This drawing shows a lathe. It's very simple and requires two people to operate it, one to pull the string and the other one to work the material. The Egyptians used lathes in stoneworking as well. As you can see, they used lathes to make vases and bowls. This bowl has a round bottom, but it still remains upright. This is because it is perfectly balanced and symmetrical so that it does not tip over when it is on a flat surface. Both the Greeks and the Assyrians used the lathe, but it wasn't until the Romans got a hold of the design that they added the next major improvement, the bow. This allowed for one person to work the lathe. He would use one arm to work the bow back and forth to get the circular motion, and the other arm to work the material. The next improvement in the lathe came during the Middle Ages. This was the pedal lathe. As you can see, it was actuated by a pedal and allowed the operator to use both hands. Here's a video demonstrating the process. As you can see, there's a springy stick, and he uses the pedal to create tension to go back and forth. Not much about lathes changed for a while until we got to the Industrial Revolution. Then with the introduction of steam engines, things started to progress. That, and we also started to introduce fixed tool bits like you see here, which allowed people to be much more precise. Nothing really changed about these machines except for the power source and how precise the tools were up until the point at which computers were introduced. Then computers allowed them to be much more precise and quicker at producing materials, and led up to the machines we see today, such as this computer-controlled machine here. Now that we've completed the history, let's move on to the basic operation of a lathe. Remember, always follow safety procedure. You don't want anything catching in the lathe. There are two main parts to a lathe, the carriage and the chuck. The carriage moves in the Z direction and the X direction. Once you have your material, select the proper speed. Use the chuck key to open the chuck wide enough to insert the material. Make sure to put your cutting bit in the lathe. For facing, center the lathe bit on, move it up just till it touches, and once it touches, then move it in the X direction away from the piece. Then turn the lathe off and wait for it to come to a stop. Once again, move the bit just till it kisses the outside, then back it up, zero out the piece, then turn the bit to the depth you want to cut. Now move in the Z direction to cut the piece. Now using a parting tool, back up and go to where you're going to part, then move in slowly and start cutting the piece. Back out every once in a while to get the pieces to clear out and to let your bit cool. Now that I've shown you the history and basic operation of a lathe, remember that a machine that was invented in the time of the Egyptians can help build something like a car.